Thanks for joining us on the Beyond the Comet podcast, where we talk about the interesting and the terrifying of the future. I'm here with Cody Cannell. My name is Ahmed Iqbal, and today we're going to discuss whether we can live forever, talk about immortality, and we're really going to talk about what it's going to take to live forever and if any of us are really prepared to pay that cost. So, Cody, what do you think? Do you think that obviously we can't live forever right now, but in the future, do you see a path to getting there?
It's a hard question. It's really difficult. I think eventually I have to say yes, but of course, eventually I have to say yes about everything because, as we get far enough into the future, you know, technology becomes magic and
Mhm.
magic becomes technology and understanding. But in my lifetime is probably the better question. I am kind of on the fence here. I think a lot of people believe that longevity will increase in our lifetime. I do think that our ability to handle disease and to reduce the crappier parts of getting older
Mhm.
will surface. Are we going to live past 120 as the high mark? I don't know if anyone's gone beyond that, but I know it's maybe slightly.
I think there's
But
a few, but not that's generally the
it's
upper
like the
limit.
high mark,
Right.
where we've kind of achieved our longevity as the human race.
Mhm.
Um, I don't see us going very far past that. It's an interesting subject matter,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of debate on this,
Right.
and there's a lot to unpack. So,
Right. And what's interesting to me, I think it's good to kind of order what we'll talk about because we've talked about the health, how technology is going to improve health outcomes and how generally that's going to extend people's lives by reducing disease and things like that. But this is more talking about significantly extending life. So we're talking about 150, 200 kind of expectancies that were not perceivable even 10, 20 years ago. Even now, I think it's hard for people to believe 150 is possible. And we're talking about the technologies that can really change what we expect, really push things past what we are expecting.
well, there's two edges to the same sword. Like, there is the quality of life, and especially the quality of life late in your later days,
Hmm.
and increasing that so that you feel younger at your point of termination, which is
Right.
a terrible way to say it. But that you don't, because it can be very rough, getting old. And if you can, but you do see there are people that age gracefully and they're, go to sleep one night and never wake up, but have had no pain throughout, most of their later days. And I think that as an achievable goal is
Right.
much closer than hitting that 150 mark or 200-year, of life.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't know. I mean, it is really interesting, what's going on. But I don't think the pathways in which we are exploring right now, it's hard to say.
Hmm.
It's hard to say. But if you give me a minute, I can actually lay down some of the stuff that's happening right now in the longevity scene.
Yeah, that'd
Uh,
be great.
yeah, so because I just got to get this, I had to do a lot of I mean, I'm actually fairly interested in this, and I've kept a very close eye. But there's a lot, there's a lot that's
Hmm.
going on, and I think that like one thing that is good to look at, or one person to look at, is David Sinclair, who is
Hmm.
really kind of leading and may have even started, this movement towards the idea that we can reverse aging. And you see his name all over the place for different studies and amazing, advancements in the reduction of aging and the understanding of the aging mechanism.
Hmm.
And his biggest thing is he created the idea that we should look at aging as a disease
Hmm.
instead of, we have all these diseases that that we get as we get old. Well, maybe aging itself is the precursor to all those diseases.
I see.
Which is, it never been looked at before. Aging was just a product of life and not looked at as something that could be curable or
Kind of like a time
changed.
based. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
so he really kind of put that nomenclature into the world,
Mhm.
which, you know, he's studying this. He's from Harvard. He's a Harvard professor. Um,
Mhm.
but he's done crazy stuff. Like, I can't really remember exactly how the experiment went, but he was able to inject using a virus as a carrier these things into the eye tissue
Mhm.
of rats that had glaucoma.
Mhm.
Glaucoma, is that right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Yeah. So, or some similar diseases like that, and was able to reverse the
Wow.
disease and actually reverse the cellular structures, you know, to a previous state. This is how it was lightly put. I didn't read the entire,
Right.
white paper on it, but it's pretty amazing that he was even able
Mhm.
to do that. So, I mean, this is like the idea of reverse aging cells and the cellular structure, and it's pretty, to see that you're like, oh my god, we can really do this. We can reverse aging. We can, hopefully live forever. Maybe we could all live forever as children again. Which is
Yeah.
another fountain of youth thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even the concept of reverse aging, because I've read before how you've probably heard of the term apoptosis, which is like programmed cell death, and it's still being studied and they're trying to figure out why it's there and how it works. But basically, most animals, I guess there are some that don't have it, but they have their cells will degrade over time, and it's typically by the age component so far what they know, and they just degrade to the point where people show the signs of aging, their organs won't work as well, things aren't running as efficiently, and eventually it leads to death of the whole system or the whole body. So in some ways, the research is going to trying to figure out why that's happening and to stop that. And so basically, you just keep continuing on.
Yeah, I mean, the general idea is like as cells divide, you're making a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy, and there becomes imperfections in the actual DNA structures and what is being expressed.
Mhm.
Because as these cells, they have their DNA from when they were created, back when you were in the embryo, these cells were created, and they had certain purposes, right? They were a skin cell or an eye cell or kidney cell or whatever. So they were encoded, to have these certain purposes, but more just that they were encoded. They were encoded with a lot more than just their current purpose, because as they go through their life cycle, their expressions of what genes are being, yeah, sorry, not the what genes are being expressed changes.
Mhm.
And this is the whole idea of epigenetics and this what genes are being expressed at what times. Um, that mechanism starts to break down. So, it becomes now certain cells are now expressing the wrong information and basically saying that when I divide, I'm dividing as now a different type of cell. And this can be
Mhm.
cancer, as cells divide and they become different. Like you can get just all sorts of different types of cells as tumors. This is
Yeah.
kind of what a tumor growth is
Mhm.
it's like a mass of these dysfunctional cells that starts to
Mhm.
to grow out of control.
Mhm.
Um, that isn't that type of cell that they're supposed to be in the first place.
Right.
And it's really cool. And so that's kind of what we're trying, or David Sinclair is trying to reduce, is these imperfections in the the reading of the cells, the information in the cells, the DNA.
Mhm.
Um, and as far as I understand, it is the expression of them. So just making sure that they are functioning correctly, so that they're expressing what they truly are when they divide.
Mhm.
Uh, so it's pretty amazing. Is this going to cause us to live to 150? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when we're saying the estimates, because I've heard other research saying that the first 150-year-old person or even 200-year-old person may already be born. So it could be, an infant or some 4-year-old living today that lives to that point, just based on, technology and healthcare that we have now that may be possible already. So And if you think about it, the number of centenarians or centenarians, basically 100-year-old people, that number has grown by extreme amounts since even 30 years ago. And just extrapolating that number increasing, that's I think where the expectation that there is that possibility already is coming from. So I don't really it's hard for us to think about living to 150, but I don't know. I don't think it's that far off, even with the standard technology.
Yeah, well, we have to look at what got us here in the first place to 120. And this is obviously the top echelon. I would imagine it's like a very low percentage of people that even get
Hmm.
close, or even to get into your hundreds. I mean, they used to have that. I don't know if they still do it on the news, because who watches cable television anymore?
Right.
Um, but where they would always bring on the person who just turned 100
Hmm.
to celebrate them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a small amount of people that even make it that far,
Hmm.
let alone to 120.
Hmm.
Um, so it's interesting. I mean, I think that what got us there is just good health. All of because there was just so much disease and so much things we didn't understand in what we were eating, and like just and all sorts of elements. And also, I think that people were killing each other a lot more back
Yeah.
then.
Well, you bring up a good point because if we're only looking at the outliers, then yeah, technology may help those people even more. So maybe they would have lived to 100 in the past, but now it could be 120 because you're limiting some of the risk. But then if you're looking at average life expectancy, which is probably a better estimate of the general health, some of that is kind of disturbing. I think because of COVID and other nutrition factors. I know in the United States, the life expectancy has gone down more recently, the overall life expectancy. And that's not really typical when there isn't war, when there aren't, other strong factors pushing that down. That's not typical. And it's a little alarming that even with all the advancements we have, that it still could go down like that in the future.
It actually makes perfect sense to me. It's we are a not industrializing, but we are a technologically alizing, and I don't know how
Hmm.
exactly what era we are in anymore, but
Hmm.
um, you know, the chemical era is kind of what I think did it when we started to mess with chemicals and we didn't really understand what these things were doing, and we put plastic into. I mean,
Yeah.
there are these like plastic based things that get in that are in all of us right now. Like the amount of plastic that's probably in your body at the current time, like stuck in fat cells or something,
Right.
is probably more alarming than it should be. And people, yeah, well, we have advanced a lot in our understanding of health and you know um being able to cure diseases and take all these. There's so many other problems that have perked up that I think are more problematic for the masses. Is advertising, this the the economy of unhealthiness,
Yeah.
basically like McDonald's or all these fast foods. They don't really give. Oh, sorry. They don't really care
Hmm.
about um, what how healthy you are. They want you just
Right.
to keep eating their burgers. And there's so many products that are like this that it becomes very difficult for the average person to have that long life guarantee. That I think that the people that are very knowledged or understood about what is causing these issues
Yeah.
benefit from the 120 or the 100 plus. But most people aren't doing the research. They don't look at what chemicals are sprayed all over their chairs, what flame retardant chemicals that are getting in their body and possibly giving them cancer. They're not
Right.
concerned about that. And I live in California, so I'm fairly feel lucky because they're pretty the forefront of making sure their citizens know what
Hmm.
goes into their products, where everywhere else that's just not the case.
But even then, there are certain things that are pretty clearly not good for you, like say, large amounts of sugar, pretty clearly not good for you, and it's pretty well known. But still, people are choosing to have them, whether it's lack of availability of other options or economics. They're just people are still choosing them, even though it's very demonstrated that it's going to shorten your lifespan. It will, create all sorts of quality of life issues and illnesses that are very difficult to deal with, but people still do it. So I do think you're right that the split is going to be there. People who know and have the resources to do something about it and feel empowered to do something about their health, they will be on the higher end of what we're talking about. And those that either don't know or don't care, they're going to drive that number down.
I think it's unfair to actually categorize those that aren't doing the research as that's the reason that they're victims.
Mhm.
Um, sugar's addictive. And
Yeah,
I
yeah. No, I agree.
and so
I'm not
and
at all
sugar's in
against that.
bread.
Yeah.
You go look at most breads, sugar's in
Mhm.
there. Like, and it's sugar's in everything. It's
And
an
pasta
additive.
sauce. Yeah,
What?
and pasta sauce.
Yeah, it's like crazy. So it's like, and it's addictive. And now you're saying, well, hey, you're consistently getting this addictive thing in all your foods without you knowing.
Yeah,
And then, we're pointing our fingers at you and casting you down because you're eating cake,
right,
and oh, that must be the reason.
right,
It's because you're addicted to the sugar in the first place
right.
because of all the products you don't realize. And it takes a lot of effort
Yeah.
to be able to weed out, and choose the right path in today's world.
Mhm. Yeah, and the support isn't there. It's one thing if you were in, like, an area where you have a lot of healthy options, but for most of the country, most of the world, the easy, typically cheap alternatives are, often unhealthy, and that makes it a lot more difficult to go against that and to, find healthy things to eat. So, I'm in no way trying to blame people. It's more observationally, it's a lot easier to fall into those bad habits, those unhealthy habits, which will affect your lifespan.
Yeah. And I think that, corporations understand that where they can have the most influence, and there are these ideas that are propagated in different parts of the world where not caring about what you eat or drink, it kind of like makes you like stronger. I don't even know what this is. This is like, there are people out, and especially in the male persuasion, um,
Mhm.
there are people out there that will get upset if you don't drink your crappy domestic beer, or their crappy
Right,
domestic beer, because there's like some sort of like understood thing of like, hey, I don't need any of that fancy stuff, and like
right.
they are prime for these big organizations to come around and feed them junk.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad. I don't know that technology can solve that, you know, because the information is already there. Maybe in terms of helping people avoid the addiction to those substances, but when it's a choice, or at least seems like a choice for them, it's hard to overcome.
Yeah, no, it is definitely a difficult world, and I think that this is going to be the biggest effect of longevity in our lifetime is just healthy choices, which is so boring, right? Like
Right.
everybody wanted to click on this thing and here's the answer. You just take these three things and you'll live forever.
Right.
Um, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think that healthy living, and a lot of the findings that even the Dr. Sinclair is finding come down to calorie restriction is like one of the most effective ways to increase your longevity, or at least increase your um, quality of life,
Mhm.
throughout your entire life. It might not change that 120 number or whatever we're all going to end up,
Right.
uh, but it's a lot better than a lot of the other promised like supplementations or medications that have come around that
Yeah.
have had their moment in the sun. But every time I read a new paper, it's like the big one is there's like these cert one and like all these NMNs and NRs, that are these supplements that are part of the NAD cycle,
Mhm.
NAD cycle.
Mhm.
And this is like the big one that everyone kind of latched onto, like, oh, this is going to be the holy grail. We're gonna, if we can get, because there was a paper that came out that showed that during they did a big group of people that were of a certain age and younger people, and they showed that one of the great differences was the amount of NAD in
Mhm.
the blood and muscle tissue. And so everyone was like, okay, and there's a decline in NAD, and this is what we need to boost in order to, and I fell down this rabbit hole a little bit,
Mhm.
boost in order to, create this longevity that everyone's looking for. And then there was just recently a paper that showed that just by exercising you could increase people that were exercising at an older age actually had equal levels of NAD than younger people. The
Just
numbers that
naturally.
they showed. So now
Yeah.
you didn't even need to take all these supplements or do all this
Yeah.
stuff. All you needed to do was the boring thing: live
Yeah,
a healthy life.
and that's kind of, it raises to me, like, some of what we like, the title, the question we ask is, what would you give to live longer? And I think a lot of people see that as, what can I pay? What can I like, what supplement can I get? What medicine, what treatment can I get to live longer while still making the choices that I make, which are often not healthy. Instead of thinking, what sacrifices would I make with my time, with my food choices, avoiding certain foods, starting to do certain exercises in order to extend my life. I think it's people are looking, and maybe it's societal, maybe it's individuals, but just thinking about shortcuts or quicker ways to get to their solution without making the changes that are difficult and, like you said, pretty boring.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I just think there's so much more we need to understand, and this is just the case of bleeding edge technology or understanding, in any field, is it's
Mhm.
constantly changing. There
Yeah.
have been, you know, parts of this story that have, I think like resveratrol was like a big one that
Mhm.
n- sorry, I got dog problems here.
Yeah.
Out. Give me a second.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, resveratrol was a big one, and it was before it was sought after, as one of the glory supplements that was going to, hand long life, and it turned out to not be as beneficial as people thought. Just with research,
Yeah.
um,
There's a lot of
and
snake oil, and I think especially when, and not even snake oil, that's a bit much because it's not like they don't provide any benefit, but I think the lack of large scale testing for some of these things, the lack of, like, full scientific studies, it's often, like, an interested party doing it, and even more so, the lack of long term, we're talking 10, 20-year studies of this stuff. There are going to be things that seem great, and then they wash away, or we find out there's something wrong with them. It's gonna keep happening, and I think that's gonna be a big impediment to the longevity, aspect, is we're gonna have to go through a lot of things and a lot of time to find out what really works.
yeah, and you know what? That's actually the portion of it that I took from the question that we asked
Mhm,
is, the lack of research on these and the lack of long-term research. There's already been scares where, and some of these supplements have been considered, to cause cancer. It was proven with other that these studies were not well founded,
mhm,
and that they shouldn't, because most of them are just B3 variants of B3.
mhm.
But there were scares out there, that if you're taking this, and they have also said that by taking a lot of these supplements, if you already are cancerous,
Mhm.
it could. The idea is that these types of things will produce better cells and more productive cells.
Oh,
Well,
so it
what
can make
ends up
that worse.
happening is the cells that are cancerous kind of hijack those cells, and so the cancer cells also get the benefit. So you may
Yeah,
not know, there is a big risk, like without full understanding of what's going on, that you're
right.
taking by being bleeding edge. You could end up, and I'm not saying it's going to happen that way. I really don't know, but you could end
Yeah,
up, making yourself have a lot shorter life.
right, and it's hard to say, especially because 'cause you're talking about, research, and one of the big things is research is sample size. If you're just testing on you, one individual, with whatever health characteristics you have, family history and everything, that's not really translatable to even someone in your own family. Definitely not someone in another country with different background, different health statistics. And I think this also highlights the fact why there isn't as much research, especially into supplements and naturally occurring things. It's because you can't patent it, and because there isn't the financial incentive for the companies that typically research this, there isn't going to be that much research. If it's, say, sunflower oil, which I don't have any claim that it does anything, but there isn't research into whether that creates longevity, because you wouldn't be able to patent sunflower oil and make a lot of money from it.
It's funny you say that, because
Mhm.
there are those that try. So what this is the path of making money from these supplements. is you get the FDA to ban them, and
Mm,
then they ban the sale. And this actually happened with resveratrol.
mhm,
It was banned, and then only one company was able to sell it under a different name
mm,
of the product, and they sell it as a doctor prescribed treatment. And actually, I hate to say it, but David Sinclair is doing this right now with NMN. NMN is one of these B3s that is part of the NAD cycle or NAD
mhm,
cycle. Um, but he is now getting the FDA to ban it, the sale of NMN, and then these are soft bans apparently. So like people like with resveratrol, people still were selling it. It was like it was unenforced ban, but there's still a ban out there. And then he comes around and he has a company that makes a variant of it,
mhm.
and only he is able to get the contract to be able to sell it.
Interesting.
So,
There's a
that's
profit
kind
angle
of.
there, but it's still that's more about getting the profit and less about doing the research. There's still not the interest or the reason to do the research. It's almost after it proves that it has some benefit or potential benefit that people are trying to make it into profit. What I'm saying is, if, say a Pfizer or Merck doesn't have the financial interest to put money into researching B12 and what it does for the body, and you're only going to get that from, say, universities, and they may not be looking specifically at the incentives to increase longevity.
Yeah, but I think if you become the sole provider of it, then you can get funding. Especially if that's the target that you're going to. You can create a company, which is what David Sinclair did. Create a company that now facilitates this, and I'm sure he's getting a lot of money. But the thing is it's really interesting because they continually find that this chemical or that it's not as important in the. It's just like everything's changing so fast, and this is true across all boards right now. Everything's
Mhm,
changing so fast that it's really hard to pinpoint what's the winning ticket, and everyone's trying to like secure the winning ticket. And I don't know if that's even possible. It should still be. You're right. It should still be altruistic research, which is hard to find, other than from what you said,
yeah,
institutions of knowledge.
yeah, and the risk even with David Sinclair, and I don't have a lot of experience with him, but if he's the only one who controls that and he's the only one doing the research, it's hard to avoid some sort of conflict of interest where obviously he's interested in it being a successful thing. You can shape research to make it look better or worse. So I would be more skeptical if it's not an independent research organization. And
And,
again, there's not that research that I've
and it's
seen.
already happened, dude. It's like the
Mhm,
NMN has already been proven to not be the best choice when uh, trying to create NAD in your tissue. I mean,
mhm.
it increases it in your bloodstream, but it doesn't show up as well in your tissue. But so it's already been kind of proven as not the best route, and yet that's the ticket he took. He is
Mhm.
very knowledgeable in the subject matter, but you're right. You're absolutely right. It's like it should be, grants to institutions, of knowledge that are being pursuing these things just for the greatness of the human race. But
Yeah,
that's
that's
not
the
how the
world
world
we live
works.
in. Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a ton of interest, and I'm sure we'll never run out of more technologies to discuss that, and advancements that are trying to extend life. But I think it'd be good to talk also about the implications that in the future, if we're average lifespan is in the hundreds or getting to 150, the implications it's going to have on society, which to me is pretty interesting area to discuss.
Yeah, it's definitely going to cause issues.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah.
is, the flip coin of this hardcore is, one is the easy one is like overpopulation. I mean, that is the already, a big problem. We there going to be enough food and clean water to support all these people? And you could say through like agricultural advancements, growing food vertically or putting food in, you know, skyscrapers, these like
Mhm.
gardens and skyscrapers and local farms and all this. the different ideas to try to kind of circumvent this. But we have a lack of energy. I think
Hmm.
we have a lack of energy. We have a lack of food. We have a lack of clean water. This is, and then it's like, okay, well, as the resources become more taxed, is that going to cause more war? And it's just all over the place.
Yeah, more. It's like the more people you have, the more challenges you have. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to get around that, and the resources aren't typically growing at the same speed. First of all, they're limited, and they're not growing at the same rate as the population. And especially if, already countries have, declining birth rates. So in some ways, the population is controlled that way. But if people are no longer dying at, 70, 80, 90, and they're adding 20, 30 years, it changes a lot of things. The first thing that comes to mind for me is, retirement security in different countries where
Yeah.
people are paying into the system, assuming that most people, they have insurance companies have charts for this, but most people who are born in this year will die by the age of 75 or 85 or whatever it is. And statistically, they've shown it's pretty accurate. But if there is a significant advancement and then all of a sudden the giant block of people you expected to die at 85 lives another 30 years, that's another 30 years that they're getting pension payments, healthcare support, all sorts of things. And they're putting demands on society that weren't expected, you know?
Yeah, and maybe those systems need to be reevaluated because they were created as static systems, and they're not. They're dynamic. They're changing. Like people's lifespans are changing, and I don't think you can calculate it because it comes from advancements in understanding, which is impossible to. I mean, I suppose you could tag it to the Moore's law or some other
Mhm.
like graph of advancement that's exponential. I, I suppose you could do it that way, but I think it's a very
Yeah.
I don't think it's a very exact.
No,
Uh,
it's not exact, and it's also slow, as we've talked about before, how laws and regulations are much slower to respond than the technology they're trying to regulate. And so, if people are living 10, 20 years longer, even if you change the law immediately, that's not going to even out because already there's a problem where there's not enough young people to support the old people who will be retiring.
yeah,
It's a broad statement, but basically the system isn't built the system is built on equal or greater numbers of young people being there to support the older people. And so if those numbers shift dramatically, then it's going to be a problem. And even thinking about the retirement age in the US, it's I think 65, 67 and a half or something like that. And they're talking about extending it. Right now, that's a later part in most people's lives. There's not a lot of years after that, typically. But
yeah.
if that's all of a sudden halftime in your life and you have another 67 and a half years to live, that changes things considerably. I mean, we have people who are out of the workforce for half of their life in retirement, and then that changes how society functions as a whole.
And also, I think that I agree, that this will become a big issue, and I think that the adjustment is going to be the problem and the burden of this. But also from like a intellectual standpoint, I do people want that to be halftime in their careers? Like, I don't think people are ready to work for 100 years or like,
Yeah.
give it like it's hard enough to even if you have the energy and you're spry and you can handle it. Don't I mean after a while you're just going to be like, hey, I just kind of want to enjoy life, and in that I don't know if that milestone is going
Mhm.
to change much because that's really just a understanding of how long you've been working, and it's like that it's kind of unfair and you want to do something else.
Yeah. I think it's going to create a lot of challenge in terms of figuring I think people will have to think about what their life is about and what they're doing with it even more so. I think a lot of people nowadays, they just go through the motions, whether by force, they don't have time to think about it. But in the future, when you have that much runway ahead of you, I don't think most people will stick in one job for that long, for sure. But I think it changes even thinking about your life as not just I work and then I retire and then I pass. It's more like this segment, this 25 years, this is what I'm going to do. The next 25, the next 25, however long that goes. It's going to be a significant shift. And I don't know that we even have the framework for figuring that out because it's typically not that long to think about.
Yeah, and I think that the problem is that all the adjustments in the thinking is happening on the latter half of your life. So it happens at, what isn't being adjusted is, okay, well, maybe we're kids longer.
Mm,
Maybe the whole thing is expanding equally across our entire life. So maybe we need to change the structures of how long you're in school or how long, to kind of equalize the impact of the workforce and like being in the workforce. That should just be one segment, but it shouldn't be the only segment that's growing,
that's a really
longer,
good point.
and then your retirement happens at the same time, and then your old age is growing longer.
Yeah. And
Maybe. Oh, go
it
ahead.
brings to mind too the disparity because as we were talking about those with more means and more resources, if they're on the longer end of longevity and those and it's already happening today where expectancies vary a lot by income level and socioeconomic status. If that continues to split, there's a huge difference if you and your family live into the hundreds, whereas other people on average are living into the 70s. That's especially in terms of, passing on wealth, supporting your kids for longer, helping, build wealth in your family. Those are a lot of advantages that are only going to make the disparity between the wealthy and not wealthy even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have more time to kind of figure it out. It depends how you feel, and like if you're able to, through this longevity, path that we're trying to, you're able to solve a lot of the conflicts that people have with being motivated, with being, the best of who they are. I think you're going to get a lot more people that utilize that time to gain wealth. And this is me just playing devil's advocate.
Mhm.
But maybe we'll see a resurgence of the middle class, where there are a lot more people that utilize, their capabilities, because I truly believe that, and I've said this in other podcasts, I truly believe that people's downfall, in their life, yes, it can be stacked against you, but I think a lot of it is because they either aren't getting access to good quality foods, that, so they're almost influenced by all these forces, that if you were to pull all those forces out of their life, I think they could think a lot clearer. I think that they could make a lot better choices. I think that prosperity would possibly become a little bit more achievable, and would, maybe not for everybody, but would bring a certain proportion of those people into the middle class from the lower class. But
Yeah.
they're just being bombarded by all of this crud, all the
Mhm.
time. And it's like they don't have it. And they're the biggest targets for it.
Yeah.
If we could reduce the amount that they're being impacted by all the bad things in life, maybe they could get themselves out of the situation that their generational gap put
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, one positive aspect I see is if we start seeing consistently longer and longer lives, I think it will make people think more about, okay, I have a long time. I don't want to be stuck in this job for that long. Or if I do live to 100, I don't want to treat my body like crap and I want it to be in good shape for when I'm 100 or still live a quality life. And I think that's my hope that that'll come through. I think what's in the way is, as you said, kind of corporate interests. It's an easy mark to sell junk food that's addictive to people who don't have many other options. It's kind of a captive audience that's going to keep buying your product and is almost forced to buy your product. But I think there is potential for it to change, especially if people see people they know making it longer, living better lives, and knowing that that's an option for them.
Yeah, and if it's clarity of thought, I think that that's achievable. With clarity of thought, you can get yourself out of any situation. The other aspect of this is, I think that, and I kind of hinted on this before with my other comment, but I think there needs to be like the rails. Like I think that you're on rails when you're going through high school. Even
Mhm,
college you could consider, but that's more of a choice. But especially high school is like kind of, you know growth on rails, right? Like
mhm,
you have to. It's a law to go to high school. You have to
mhm.
go there. You have to be part of this system that is supposed to encourage a benefit in your life. Whether it
Right.
does, I mean, this is a big topic,
Hmm.
the quality of public schooling and all that stuff. But I think that that those rails need to be extended into like 25. I think you should go to high school until you're like 25 or at least 23, because
Yeah.
what's happening is as life is getting longer, also are the issues of responsibility becoming more complex.
Hmm.
So in order to have a success where you can have guidance until you reach the age of making good choices, which would be in my consideration outside of your 20s, like when
Hmm.
you turn your 30s, you start to be able to kind of foresee what you're talking about, which is how long life is and like what are
Right.
all the options. Who am I,
Yeah.
is a
Yeah.
great question that you finally start to answer somewhere around in your 30s, and you start to define who you are, and not care about it anymore,
Hmm.
as much, and
Right.
we're all different people. So
Hmm.
uh, I think the rails need to be extended a little bit in the beginning.
Yeah, and I even extending on that, I think we don't need to throw kids into school at 5 or 6, right?
Yeah,
They can just
agreed.
I'm not saying they just stay at home and their parents watch them, but there are other systems that could come into place where let the kids play, let them figure out what interests they have, learn more social development, more interpersonal things. And, for example, there's a quote about kindergarten teaching you so much, like most of what you learn in kindergarten. Why not extend that for a 4 or 5 year period? So then kids are developing those skills before they're out and forced onto the rails of, elementary, middle, and high school.
And I think this is so like exactly tied to longevity, because
Hmm.
why the system was created was you didn't have that long to live. I mean, most people didn't live till like they died at 30, so it was
Yeah.
like the whole system was created to like try to get you as much knowledge and get you out there so you could have kids and get married at like 20,
Right.
or even earlier, like 18, get married, have kids, and then hopefully do something with your life if you can even get that far
Right.
without, getting disease or being killed by your neighbor.
Hmm.
It it's completely changed, and everything kind of needs to stretch out, everything
Yeah.
needs to extend its purpose.
The question that I'd have is if there is still that disparity, which unfortunately I think is going to continue, which which stretch do you use? For example, if certain people are averaging in the hundreds, 150, but then others are 70 or even shrinking to 65 life expectancy, it's going to disadvantage one group if you stretch the system or shrink the system,
I don't
the
think it
timeline.
I mean, it depends, then it's very hard to say this because it all comes to the curriculum that they're being taught. Are they getting the right sources, through high school in order to make the right choices, in order to not be so impacted by society and, their economic,
Ec- Economic,
no, the classes. What is it?
socioeconomic.
Thank you. I just don't know why I can say socioeconomic standing. I think that is one thing, that schools need to be kind of aware of. But I do think having them in this system could benefit them a lot more, because it is very well known that that younger minds are easily targeted,
Hmm.
for all sorts of things. I mean, from smoking used to do it, back in the day with all their ads,
Yeah. Even
and
Saturday morning cartoon commercials, trying to get kids to
every
buy stuff.
arcade, but there was a point in time where you would go to the arcade when they existed, and there would
Mhm.
be a cigarette vending machine
Mhm.
right next to the arcade. I hate to say this, but I smoked a little in my day, and
Mhm.
I used to be able to get cigarettes from the cigarette vending machine
Wow.
at near the arcade, and it's
Yeah.
like, what is going on?
Right.
Um, and also like the bubblegum cigarettes. You remember those?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and they had like Big League Chew, which is chewing tobacco. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's crazy.
It's hard to believe. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how the longevity issue, because I think the growing pains are going to become so obvious if we have big jumps like everything else. When there's a big jump in longevity, if it happens,
Mhm.
um, especially, and I'm not talking necessarily about the 150. I'm just talking about more people making it up to 120, more
Right.
people having, even making it into their 90s.
Right. That's
Um,
significant. Yeah.
yeah, as that group becomes larger and larger through advances in health, we're gonna have to address the entire system.
Yeah, and there's tons of things that have to be addressed with it because, healthcare, transportation, just housing even, because if you don't have people passing away, then all of a sudden you don't have as many houses available to move into, and that creates a short. I mean, it's already being seen. That's part of what explains why the housing market's so crazy. So I think, a good thing, I think most people would agree that extending longevity, especially if it includes quality of life, is a good thing. It will create a lot of hard questions and not early on, not that many solutions. And we're, like you said, we're going to have to go through some growing pains.
So I have one last question.
Sure.
Will you swap out your organs
Okay.
that are your stem cell grown organs? Will
Uh-huh.
you do a full swap out of all your organs to live longer?
So you're saying these are not coming from another living
Oh no,
person?
this is the premier
Yeah.
stem cell grown. They're your organs. They're
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's the obvious answer that I would weigh the risks of the surgery and everything, but assuming that was within my acceptable range, I don't think I would have a problem.
yeah. And this is actually where I think we're going to get closer to what you're talking about.
Hmm.
From it's unfair from those with wealth
Yeah.
and those without.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
because some of and that's why I think it's great that a lot of the things we've been talking about first are those things that are achievable, like just being aware of what
Yeah.
you're putting into your body,
And accessible.
exercising. It's
Yeah.
achievable by anybody,
Right, and
but
accessible, meaning, like, anyone
accessible.
can walk, anyone can, make better choices. It's hard, but they still can make better choices, but having the funds to, create a new heart or a new lung is going to really be a choice for wealthier people and not a choice for people with less money. But at the same time, that's kind of what happens today. There's people who just can't get life-saving or life-extending surgery because they don't have the money or the healthcare.
That is true, and that is the healthcare system, which is a large topic.
Yeah,
Um, but again, you could also then argue that they're needing to get these, procedures because of their bad health in the first place, which,
yeah,
maybe choices could have. It's the idea that, prevention is better than
right.
solving the problem.
But it's so
Um,
much more boring.
yeah, it's so much more boring.
Right.
Why not eat the cheesecake? It's
Yeah, yeah,
uh, and the little dopamine hits. That's the other
right,
one. It's like,
right.
which we all, are find ourselves conflicted with, is
Yeah.
all the little things that make us feel happy that maybe might not be doing the best for us.
So maybe to sum up longevity, the answers to prolonging your life kind of are already there. If you're looking for, lifestyle changes, nutrition changes, health changes, they're there. But what I think will come on, what we'll see more of is step changes in terms of supplements and treatments and procedures that can help extend your life, even if you don't choose those healthy ways of getting there.
Oh, I think there's going to be a whole bunch of companies that store extra organs for you, like
Wow.
basically the equivalent to the guy with the big jacket
Right.
in the alley
Right.
that like has like eyes and like a heart in there.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's going to be swap out companies, and like it's going to get weird, man. And I don't
Yeah.
know if it's going to, this is equivalent to if you switch out all the parts in a dying vehicle,
Mhm.
in your car, does it actually extend the life? And most people would say no, because it's multiple failures that are happening all over the place, that it's
Right.
impossible to catch them all, and something's going to get you. So there's that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely going to happen. It's definitely
Right.
going to happen.
Well, I hope we're still making podcasts when we're 150 plus. We'll do the best to get there.
Yeah, we'll be the Futurama heads in jars, which is my favorite, where everyone's head is in a jar.